Hello everyone. In this video I wanted to discuss the topic of speciation, but before I get into what speciation is and how it occurs, I first wanted to define the term species. A species can be defined as a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. This is perhaps the best way to classify species since the two groups of organisms could look very similar, such as the eastern meadowlark and western meadowlark, but be distinct species, while other groups of organisms could look very different, like various dog breeds, but be the same species. Speciation refers to the process by which one species diverges into two distinct species over evolutionary time. This process can also be referred to as divergent evolution. This can happen when two populations of the same species become reproductively isolated from one another, thereby preventing gene flow between the populations. Over time, these two populations will evolve independently until eventually the two species could no longer reproduce and/or produce fertile offspring. In general, there are two different types of speciation that you should be familiar with: allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Allopatric comes from the Greek word allos, meaning other, and patra, meaning fatherland. This type of speciation occurs when a physical or geographical barrier, such as a body of water or a mountain range, prevents two populations from interbreeding, thereby allowing them to evolve independently. This can be seen in antelope squirrels residing on either side of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. The squirrels found on the north rim were geographically isolated or separated from the squirrels found on the south rim when the Grand Canyon began to form millions of years ago. These two populations eventually evolved independently through natural selection and random mutations, until eventually two distinct species of antelope squirrels are found on either side of the Grand Canyon today. Sympatric, on the other hand, comes from the Greek words syn, meaning together, and patra, which again means fatherland. For this type of speciation, populations become reproductively isolated while living in the same geographical area. In other words, something other than a geographical structure serves as a reproductive barrier between the two populations. Sympatric speciation can occur in a few ways. One of these ways is through polyploidy. If you recall, a haploid organism is one that has only one set of chromosomes, while a diploid organism is one that has two sets of chromosomes. A polyploid organism is one that has multiple sets of chromosomes, which is fairly common in plants but less common in animals because too many or too few chromosomes for a diploid animal leads to mortality. Polyploidy in plants may arise when there is an initial error in cell division, leading one of the diploid cells of a plant to become tetraploid, having 4 sets of chromosomes as opposed to 2 sets of chromosomes. If this cell then develops into a branch with flowers, and the flower asexually reproduces through self-fertilization, the following generation of plants would be tetraploid. These tetraploid plants would be unable to successfully create viable offspring, with the original diploid plant indicating that they are distinct species. Another way to achieve sympatric speciation would be through habitat differentiation. Habitat differentiation describes a circumstance where organisms start occupying different habitats within the same general environment. This is often due to the availability of the organism's preferred food source. For example, this can be seen looking at the finches, or Darwin's finches as they are sometimes called, on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. At one point, Darwin's finches all originated from a common finch ancestor. Once the finch arrived to the island and started procreating, different finches began undergoing mutations, causing their beak shapes and behavior to change. Some finches began spending more time on certain islands, and perhaps closer to the ground to consume seeds or nuts, while other finches began spending more time on other islands or perhaps higher in the trees to consume tree-dwelling insects. Because different finches were spending most of their time in the habitat that they preferred, that also meant that they were more likely to mate with other finches that naturally preferred that habitat too. This eventually led to the divergence and speciation of various finch populations on the Galapagos Islands. As a slight tangent, the Galapagos finches also demonstrate another phenomenon called adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation refers to the evolution of many diverse species from a single ancestral species. This occurs rapidly when various new niches become available. You can think of a niche as a specific role that an organism may play in an ecosystem. ground-dwelling seed eater or tree-dwelling insect eater are both examples of niches that were filled by different finches not too long after the ancestral finch colonized the Galapagos Islands. One final way to achieve sympatric speciation is through sexual selection. Sometimes new mutations arise that can cause select females within a population to be more attracted to a particular characteristic or behavior in the males. This in turn leads to a reproductive barrier where some females are only mating with the males that have the desired attribute. For example, in Lake Victoria in Africa, there are various species of kitchlage, which is a type of fish. Research has shown that female kitchlages of one species prefer to reproduce with males that have more of a red color, while females of a different species prefer mating with males that have more of a blue color. It also turns out that the females that prefer red males have vision that is more sensitive to red light, while the females that prefer blue males have vision that is more sensitive to blue light. This mutation in eyesight likely led to behavioral isolation by means of sexual selection, causing the kitchlid population to speciate. As a final note, I wanted to include that while I only discussed allopatric and sympatric speciation in this video, there's really a spectrum of ways that speciation can occur. This includes peripatric speciation and parapatric speciation, which are beyond the scope of this video. That's it for this video. Be sure to stay tuned for my part 2 video on speciation.